But let's get into it. Let's
Totally.
get into the review. Anachrony came out in 2017 and took the world by storm. The designers are David Turksey, Richard Amon, and Victor Peter. And the artists, deep breath, try and pronounce them correctly, Tom. Vio Farkas, Laszlo Fayez, Laszlo Forgach, Martin Kiss, and Peter Meslenyi. I hope I got those somewhere near close. And the publisher is the amazing Mind Clash Games. Maddie, tell us about Anachrony.
The theme of Anachrony is trading in the Mediterranean in the 16th century. And that's it. It's very basic. We've seen it a thousand times. Actually, no. It is hands down the weirdest theme. This is the Zardoz of board games. This is the, I'm sorry, what? When someone tells you the
what are you
theme of
talking?
this game.
It's not that weird. You're.
Have you?
I've read
have
it.
You read the story?
Yes, I've read. Okay,
it's
so
bizarre.
The story is a little bizarre, but if you
that's what I'm saying.
If you boiled it down to the basics of it, it's not that different than 12 Monkeys, really.
Well, okay, but so it's. Okay, if we want to ignore the actual lore and say it, see, that's the problem. Is though if you ignore the lore, you're not really doing the story justice. So
right.
the story that we tell
the
story is the world is going to end. An asteroid is going to hit the planet in a few eras, a few rounds, and we have to prepare for that. But at the same time, we have to put forth our own faction's ideology in order to create the new civilization after the world ends, and become the strongest faction in the new era. But the story is much weirder than that because the world already ended. We live in an apocalypse. Time travel came, and time travelers came to warn us about an asteroid hitting in the future. But we also have been given the power of time travel, but that power has caused the world. It gets totally crazy. I mean, like the story is beautifully bizarre. But basically, time travel exists, and the world's going to end soon, and you got to get out before it ends. But you can also get some help from your future self because we have time travel. Does that about cover it?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, the time travel isn't really getting help from your future self. It's kind of... I mean, yeah, it is, but it's also fixing the time travel mechanism in the game has a lot to do with traveling back to fix the help that you already got, right?
Right. It uses that fun time travel idea of if you and I were sitting next to each other and you were hungry and you said, I want a burrito. And
yes.
Then you opened up the refrigerator and there was a burrito. Because your future self remembered to put a burrito there. That's sort of the kind of time travel we're dealing with here.
Bill and Ted's Face the Music just came out, and I just watched it, and it reminds me very much of that, where, oh, remember that we have to steal Dad's keys. Okay. Right, and you can make that, and that's literally what you do. One of the early things you do in the round is you are going to pull items from the future and suddenly manifest them. Suddenly it's like, oh wow, you know what? I'm going to need another engineer this round, and I'm going to need some plutonium or uranium or whatever. Well, guess what? I'll just create it from the future, and boom! Now all of a sudden I have it. And the only thing
that's the fun conceit of the game. That's how you can sell anybody on this game by just saying, okay, here's the concept. Ready? Any resource in the game that you want, you just ask for it and you can have it. But you better pay it back. Your future self better pay it back or you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, without that, this is not that difficult a game to explain. This is a worker placement game where you are going to be getting more workers. You are going to be gaining resources. You're going to be using those resources to build buildings on your own player mat, which are also worker placement spaces, right? I mean, that's really and you're going to be researching technology so that you can buy really big things that significantly change the game that you can put on your building
Super
spaces
project,
instead.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's really all the game is.
This is a worker placement tableau building game, 100%. There is just a couple interesting twists to it, like the time travel twist, and then also the fact that there's a main board for worker placement and your own board. And the main board, you have to have a secondary step to worker placement, which you have to have a sort of a life support system, a mech sort of hooked up, because the radiated apocalyptic world can't survive. You can't live on it just as your own self. So you have to have a mech ready to go that you can place there. So there's a couple fun twists on it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a pretty basic worker placement tableau builder.
But it doesn't feel basic. It doesn't feel. I'm not playing on Mars. It's not incredibly Baroque. It's not. It feels like a Euro. If you've played a bunch of Euros, you grasp the mechanisms and how to play the game fairly easily. But because of the time travel, because of the flexibility of that, and because powering up those power suits to go out and do those things is expensive, and you're basically budgeting your workers and trying to figure out how many of them are going to be able to go out and do the big actions on the main board, and how many of them are going to stay at home and take the actions of the buildings that you've already built. It's a very interesting decision space. It really is.
It plays 1 to 4 players. The BGG gives it a weight of 3.99, which I agree with, but the basic rules of the game are not the weight. The weight is brought from 2 main things. One, the massive asymmetry that is here, much like Gaia Project. I mean, you are wildly asymmetrical from other people, not only in your leader's power, of which you have 2 to choose from every game, but the 4 paths in the game, which are sort of the factions. They're called paths. Each path has an asymmetrical board that has different costs for buildings and a different sort of superpower. And then beyond that, you also have your evacuation condition, of which you randomly choose 1 every game. And your evacuation condition is something that you're sort of aiming for. It's sort of your end game condition. So all of that is where the weight comes from, all of the sort of chrome in essence.
Yeah. I think that 4.0 is too heavy. Or 3.99 is way too heavy for this. I don't think the game I think it tells people the wrong thing.
When you have a really interesting theme like this, the weight goes up because more casual players are brought in, and BGG has a system where the weight is decided by the users.
And there's a problem with weight as a component, because, and we've talked about it many times, it's because what are we talking about? Are we talking about how difficult it is to learn or how complex it is to play? Those are 2 quite different things, right? And there's a separation. Let's just put it this way. It has the exact same weight as Indonesia. It has the same weight as, I don't think that's right. I think
to me, it's the teach, though, is what I think of, really. And this is a long teach. I mean, I don't think this is any simpler of a teach than Indonesia. I mean, in terms of how long it takes and the attention required by, the players at the table, I think it's a teach.
Yeah, maybe. Barrage and City Big Shoulders are right around the same level of complexity. I feel that
it's just a long teach because there's so many, not edge cases, but differences. Okay, he does this, she does this evacuation condition does this. And then, of course, the game is sort of split into 2 sections. There's before the impact and after the impact. So, we're all sort of doing different things. Once the impact hits, you have to understand what that's going to change to the game state. It's going to change the actual boards. It's going to create the potential end game condition. So there's a lot of chrome.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk more about what makes the game completely unique, which is the time travel aspect. So during a round of the game, you are going to, very early on, before worker placement happens, you are going to be able to take these triangular pieces, and you're going to be able to put warp tiles, and you're going to be able to put them into the current time. You're going to take them from someplace in the future, and you're going to put them in the current time. And when you do, you get those resources.
You want to tell them about the timeline real quick?
Immediately. Yeah, the timeline is 4 spaces before the event, and then 3 spaces after the event. So basically, you have 4 full rounds of the game to prepare for destruction. And when the destruction happens, all sorts of the board changes fairly radically. All of a sudden, all those worker spaces on the big board become one-time use, and then they're gone for good. and they also
But they become superpowers.
yes, they give you great, huge extra benefits. So even though you may want the game to go longer, can you resist the temptation of going out there and getting that really, really great thing that's out there, right? Which is kind of cool.
Right. And that's also the end game trigger, because the game can go from 5 to 7 rounds. And what decides whether it lasts between 5 and 7 is how often people go to those spaces. So once all those worker placement spaces that are now one-time uses are used up, well, the game ends at the end of that round.
And just because of the variable player count, it looks like in 3-player games, the game is almost always going to end in the 5th round, just because you're playing with the same number of spaces, basically, as you have in the 2-player game, and you have a third player placing things down. In the 2-player game, it seems like it could end in 5. It's more likely to end in 6. And 4-player, I can't really speak to, but my guess is probably round 6. What do you think?
Yeah, I think 6 is typical for 2 and 4. Yeah, that's what I found. I think 7 is once in a blue moon. You'll see that.
Yeah, sort of an edge case. I would say that if people went really heavy building strategies, a lot of people with very heavy building strategies, I could see you using your workers on your own buildings to try and build up a huge score afterwards. It's interesting. Anyway, you take these warp tiles and you place them back in the current era, and you get those benefits right away. But then comes the anachronies, right? We're going to roll a die, and anywhere you have the most of those warp tiles, any one time period, any one era, any one more round of the game where you have more than everybody else, or you're tied for the most, you're going to roll a die, or you're going to take one anachrony token, right?
Paradox
token, correct? Sorry, you're going to roll the paradox die. The paradox die is exactly the same as the democker die, which is to say there is one space on it that says no paradox, one space on it that has 2 paradoxes, and all the rest give you one paradox. So it's very small amount of randomness in it, right?
Right. And the reason that you were rolling that die is because we are playing a negative area majority game. So everybody during the warp phase, when you're deciding what things you want, is going to choose anywhere from 0, 1, or 2 of their available warp tokens. They're going to hide them in their palm. Everybody's then going to stick their palms out, flip them over, and reveal what's in your palm. And then those go on the current timeline. And then next phase, when we evaluate the paradoxes, whoever has the most in each era will be rolling a die, and you'll roll a die for every era that you have the most in on the timeline. And if you get 3 paradoxes, you get an anomaly, which is a negative building, a bad building. It takes up a building space on your board, costs you negative points if it's still there at the end of the game, and the only way to get rid of it is to send a worker there and pay some resources and kill that worker and remove the building.
So how do you avoid getting those? Well, you can build a time-traveling building. You can build up to 3 of them, actually, and each of them have a different range. Like some of them can only go back 1 era, some of them can go back multiple eras, right? And when you use a time travel building for that, you can pick up one of those warp tokens and return it to the supply. But in order to do that, you must pay back what you have borrowed. Essentially, you have to fix things, right? So if I borrowed an engineer, I have to throw away an awake engineer. There's an awake and asleep thing as well. We can get into that. But you have to throw away an available engineer to make up for the engineer you got from the future. Essentially, you're sending them back to the future. Oh, that sounds like
So, Tom, why? It sounds like a good movie idea. Tom, why would I want to ask for a resource that I then later have to just pay back? What am I benefiting from that?
Well, let's talk. There are actually several different dimensions to that, but let's talk about the main 2. The main 2 reasons are, as you know, in most games, we start off games having a very little bit of an engine, so we're in need of things to make things better. So getting resources early in the game, one plutonium, one uranium early in the game is way more valuable than one uranium later in the game, when you probably have buildings and mechanisms whereby you can generate things that you need. So that in and of itself is of tremendous value earlier on. But also, one of the game's scoring mechanisms is time travel itself. When you travel back in time and fix the timeline, fix your own mistakes that you have done, every time you do that, every time you return a warp tile, you move up on a time travel track. And that starts at 0 and it moves all the way up to sometimes as many as 16 victory points, which is quite
20.
a considerable amount of
20 is the highest
is that
for
right?
one of the paths.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. So
that could be a third or half your score, depending on the game.
Yeah. So I found myself in the last game. I realized, the right buildings, both games actually, the right buildings came out for my particular strategy. Just lucked out. Just happened to get the things that I needed. And I realized, wow, that leaves me a bunch of other actions that I normally would be scrambling to do this or scrambling to do that. Suddenly I have all these other actions, and I realized, you know what? I need to start warping more materials into the past, because I now, even though I don't need those materials, I want the points I can get by returning them, right? By cleaning up the timeline and doing that action. So it's very interesting.
And so one of my favorite parts about this game is the buildings. And when you first learn the game, you're like, ooh, time travel, all this fun stuff, worker placement. But I think after your first game, you realize, the buildings are the game. It's really the buildings you buy, the order you buy them in. Mm-hmm. That's your strategy. That's your game. Yeah. So many of the points can come from the buildings, and that's your engine as well. So, and I realized, why do I like that so much? And I realized it reminds me of Lorenzo El Magnifico, because you've got different buildings, but it's not just random stacks of buildings. Each type of building does a specific thing, just like the types of cards in Lorenzo do a specific thing.
And you're sort of
Go ahead.
And there are 4 of them, 4 different types.
Yeah, exactly. There are 4. So, the yellow buildings are all time travel, and the blue buildings are all about water, which is the food resource to wake your workers. And the gray buildings are all about resources, and the red buildings are all the rule breakers. They give you superpowers or sometimes end game points, or they boost the other actions. It's kind of the potpourri. The purple in Lorenzo would be it. So it's very similar to Lorenzo in that sense, is that you're sort of picking a few columns and making those your strategy. And that adds such a variability to every game. And that's what I love about Lorenzo, too. It's like, maybe I'm going a green strategy this time. Maybe I'm going yellow. Maybe I'm going purple and blue. And they feed off each other and do an interesting thing. But you also realize you maybe need a little bit of everything to get your engine going. And that tableau building is awesome to me. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it is. And the variety of those buildings, I think they did a great job with them. There are some buildings that don't require a worker, that simply give you a little boost, like making it cost half to wake up all of your spent workers. There's
a nice design nod to Zolkin there, which I appreciated.
Yes, there are spaces which require a worker, and then after you use it, that worker will be spent, will be tired. There are some where the action isn't quite as great, and guess what? As a little bonus, they say your worker, after doing this, is awake and can be used right away in the next round of the game. And then there are even some that are really good, that once you use that worker dies. There's a little skull symbol for that, which is fantastic. A really well designed aspect to the game that I thought was really good.
I agree as well, but also the weakest buildings are worth a lot of points. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some really crappy buildings that the first time you play, you're like, why would I ever buy that? Well, because it's worth 4 victory points. And that could be 10% of your entire score. So the more I play, the more I start looking at those crappy buildings, and I'm like, that's a really good building. 4 points is no joke, and it costs the same as the 1 point building. And so collecting those high point ones actually is totally a valid strategy.
I did very well. Both of my games, I built the resource buildings. I built the factories first. I had 2 factories were my first 2 buildings in both games, I believe, and used those resources to make sure that I was building. And I think I won most buildings in both of those games. It's a
Yeah.
it's a really strong advantage. It is an engine that benefits you in many ways, and even those, and you're right, even those small effect buildings can have a big impact on your score. Score is an interesting thing because there's so many different ways. There are a lot of different ways you score points in the game. There is the buildings themselves have point values on them. There's the amount of times you time travel it scores you points. The way you wake up your workers. You can wake up your workers by spending water and basically hydrating and taking care of them. And when your workers come back to work, you improve your morale. Your morale is a victory point condition. Or you can simply wake them up and not spend any water, and then their morale goes down because you're basically whipping them or whatever. You're forcing them back.
You're not feeding them. Yeah.
Correct. That slider right there is victory points. There is also super projects, which are basically technologies that you're going to develop, and those are victory points. And there are, is it 4 or 5 different conditions, victory point conditions at the top of the board each game?
There are 5, and no matter the player count, it's always 5.
5. Yeah, 5 things. So the person who built the most buildings, the person who can time travel the farthest distance as a combination of your buildings, various things like that.
And those are friendly ties too, which is interesting because if everybody does it, then it cancels each other out.
Wash, exactly right. And then last but not least, there is an evacuation that happens, and that can be a huge amount of points. Up to 30 points in the game can be scored through evacuation. Maddie, tell me what the heck is evacuation and how do you do it?
All right, so at the impact happens at the end of the 4th round. And when the impact happens, we flip over this giant Zardaw's head on the board, and on the back becomes a unblockable worker placement space. But the rule is everybody can only visit the space once in the entire game. And the last person to go there, depending on the player count, is going to get a minus 3-point token. So there's a little bit of a rush to get there, but everybody gets to go there. It's just the last person to go there gets minus 3 points. And when you take that action, which only becomes available starting in the 5th round of the game, you achieve your evacuation condition, or you check your evacuation condition. So like I said at the beginning of the game, you're going to choose a path, which is going to give you a asymmetrical board. There is a unasymmetrical board side, which is side A. If you played Eclipse, it'd be the humans, where they all play the same. Obviously, we would never play that way. We like asymmetry, and we're always going to play the most asymmetrical version we can. So side B, they're all asymmetrical.
I'll just say that I think that we've often talked about it. We've never done it, but we always talk about it might be really fun to play Eclipse where everyone's human. In other words, where everyone is exactly the same, and maybe that's a truer test of the best player. And so maybe there's I think that's the one non-basic reason to possibly play that way.
Yeah, but more as a fun experiment than as the ideal way to play. But so you're picking a path, then you're picking one of your 2 leaders, which is your superpower. Then you're randomly being assigned one of your 2 evacuation conditions. So evacuation conditions have 2 components to them. The top component is the thing you must achieve in order to evacuate. Now, this isn't one of those sort of co-op games or semi-co-op games where if you don't evacuate, you're eliminated. You don't have to evacuate. The game won't eliminate you. You could still potentially win. And the designer has even said on some boards that it is possible to win without evacuating, but it is hard because your evacuation score is probably going to be 50% of your entire score.
At least a third, right?
Yeah, up to 50%. It could totally be. It maxes out at 30 points. So the first part is the thing you must have a condition. So they're all going to be different types of buildings. So this is going to give you something to collect. So 3 of the yellow buildings, 3 of the gray buildings, 3 of the red buildings, 3 of the blue buildings. You're going to have one of those. A couple of them are different things like have a certain amount of water or even have a certain amount of anomalies, negative buildings as well. If you have achieved that, you'll get a certain amount of points, but then you are allowed to check the second condition, which is where the bulk of the points are. And this is just set collecting of resources. So it's, have the gold resource and the genius workers, or have the most super projects, or scientists plus breakthroughs, or just the amount of workers. And then you're going to score points for those sets, for as many as you have, up to a maximum of 30 points. So you must have your evacuation condition met in order to be able to check the real point scoring machine. And you don't spend those goods, you just have to have them. So it really does give you a path to chase, and it gives everybody a different path to chase.
Which creates a really good variety of the way the game lays out, right? It's one of those things where you need to get engineers. Another person, they need to get uranium or something along those lines, and
yeah.
That, and knowing that, I think that once we play the game more and more, you always start off these games staring at your own board and figuring out what you have to do. And then once you get really comfortable with that, you start staring at everyone else's board and realizing, okay, he's got a really good chance that his first action, he's going to want to go to this space or to that space. And being able to predict that, being able to figure out what a person needs the most, really creates I think that's one of the things that makes really great games really great, which is that your ability to sort of forecast what might happen and strategize based on that, I think is amazing. And this game's got a lot of that going on.
Yeah. I think the last thing we talked about is super projects. So above each section of the timeline is a different super project. Think of a super project as a super building. It takes up 2 spots on your buildings, and it has a huge amount of points. They usually range from 3 to 7 points, and it gives you some kind of crazy rule-breaking power. Sometimes it's a new action space. Sometimes it's something that scores points at the end. Sometimes it's just an awesome boost to one of the actions in the game. But in order to build these, it's going to cost a lot, and it's going to cost a resource in the game that is only used for super projects, which is breakthroughs. So breakthroughs are a place you can go on the main board where you can be rolling some dice. There is a die that has different symbols on it, like circle, triangle, and square, and there's a die that has 6 or 5 different strange symbols, like DNA symbol and people symbol and all these different things. And they're just random collections of shapes and symbols, but each breakthrough requires either one specific one. So let's say this breakthrough needs a triangle with the DNA symbol, or 2 non-specific ones. So it would just need a circle and a square, the symbol, it doesn't matter. So you have to go to these spaces and sort of this is the research action, right? So thematically, you're researching a super project, and you have to have the correct breakthroughs in order to be able to have it. But there's a little bit of a fun gamble of, do I go for the exact one, or do I guarantee it and go for just the generics? But it's going to take more actions in order to get there. That's a fun little level to the game.
Is there actually a gamble, though? Here's my question. It seems to me like the proper way to do it is the first time you go there, because one of the dice you can choose and the other die you roll. So if you always choose the symbol with your first action, and then you roll, you're either going to Yahtzee and get exactly what you need, or you're going to get one of the other 2 symbols. And then the second time you do it, you just select the other symbol. So you're always guaranteed to getting it on the second try if you don't get it on the first try. Yes?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But if getting it on your first is a big deal. It's an entire action. It's an exosuit. That's a level of variance and luck that some people might not like. Watching somebody else hit that can be frustrating.
Yeah, I totally agree. There is some luck in this game. This game, for all of its weight and explanation and depth, it kind of has a lot of design cues that are like, let's not take this so seriously. Let's have some fun here, right?
And I like that. And they've given you an opportunity to lower that too. You can play without the paradox die, and just negative area majority always gets 1 paradox.
Yeah.
And I think they've balanced the research well, because if you don't get what you want, research is actually, just collecting those is actually a totally viable point strategy as well, because that's the only resource in the game that scores points. They're worth 1 point each, but if you have a whole set of all 3 different symbols, it's an extra 2. So it's 5 points for having 3 of them. And like we said, 5 points is a ton of points in this game. So even failing on a roll sometimes sets you down the path of, well, maybe I just start collecting these. I've had two of my games, I've had 10 points from them, and that's a lot. You know, it didn't take a huge amount of work to do. It's just sort of, oh, I have an extra worker. I'm going to go there and just get a symbol I don't have.
Yeah, yeah. I think I built one super project in both games that I played this week, and in one of the games I was saying to myself in my mind, I'm just going to ignore super projects. I have too many other things going on. And then as I was playing, I realized, oh, guess what? Nobody's taking the research actions. It's low hanging fruit, right? And because you can score points in many different ways, all of a sudden I was like, I don't even want the power of the super project, but those points are, very, very attractive.
And a lot of times it combos nicely with your time travel too, because you can only build the super project that you are focused on in your era. So you can only build the one that you are in that moment. So if you have time traveled back in the past, you can only build the super project that's above you there. So sometimes you have to time travel already to pay back one of your resources. And then lo and behold, above you is a tasty super project. And now you can build it.
All right, let's get into pluses and minuses. What do you love about this game, and do you have any criticisms or worries about it?
Yeah, well, right before, I just want to say, so we this was a review copy that we were sent by Mindclash, and I really appreciate them sending it to me. I have already backed the Fractures of Time Legendary box, which comes with everything. So I am in for a penny, in for a pound, no matter what. I bought the whole thing, but they sent us a review copy because I reached out to them and said, we would love to review just the base game before the expansion comes out, but I know it's going to be a long time. And they said, let us just send you this. So the reason they sent us a copy of this also is because there's a new edition of it out, which is called the Essential Edition. This has balance changes. It is cheaper. The original was almost $100. This is $55 full price. You can probably find it for less online. But if you buy it directly from them, it's $55. It takes away some of the expansion modules that were coupled in before, but the price is a lot lower. The barrier to entry is lower. It doesn't come with the fancy minis. You can buy those separately. But I think it has some really valuable balance changes. Now, if you already have the original version, they are going to be selling a upgrade pack eventually, but you also don't totally need it. You can just download the new rulebook. The changes are minor. They're not printed on the board or anywhere or any of the buildings. It's just some of the leader powers are nerfed or improved.
There was a consensus that the yellow faction was slightly weaker than the others, and they did it looks to me like good balancing, really.
Yeah, I didn't feel like anybody was weaker or stronger in my 4 or 5 plays of it so far. But yeah, I just want to say, this is a review edition, but I also just want to say that the original Anachrony is out of print. So if this is a game you're interested in, it has a cheaper entry level to it. And then if you love it, you can decide to add on the beautiful exosuit miniatures, which, by the way, I did buy as a gift for you, Tom. Because you are going to be inheriting this Essential Edition, and I could not imagine you not having the beautiful miniatures because I know how much you love miniatures.
You're so sweet. You're the best, man. That's awesome.
And the miniatures are awesome because normally in the game, it's just a little hex that you put your worker token on. And in this one, it's these beautiful ornate miniatures that have a slot, and you slide your worker into the top of it, and you can see its head poking out the top. And it's awesome. It's so awesome. It's like you're like loading Ridley into the like freight loader. It's just so cool.
I feel icky just thinking about having that. Oh my God. Okay.
You're going to love it. Okay. So I just wanted to mention what we're playing, how you can get it if you want, and that this was indeed a review copy supplied by Mindclash. If I quit my life as a screenwriter and dedicated myself to designing board games, I would find myself in direct competition with Mindclash games, because I think I would want to design the same types of games they make. I want heavy games with crazy out there themes that we have never seen before, where the theme shines as strongly through as the gameplay and the mechanics. And I think in Tricarion and in Anachrony, they have achieved that goal. And I adore those games. And so it's almost like they're designing games just for me. That being said, I am very glad there are expansions coming out, because I do think even after my 5 games of this, that it would start to feel a little samey. There is a lot of asymmetry, of course, and variability in the things you can do. And I love the no pun intended, the gameplay loop of this. But it is a pretty basic worker placement tableau builder, and once you sort of get past the cool bells and whistles they've added to it, there is a very solid worker placement tableau builder there. But I think it starts feeling a little samey. It has the potential to, which is why we have some very exciting expansions coming out as well. So to me, that's it. I think there are potentially, like I played one of the factions, Path of Salvation, and the whole strategy was collecting. I have to time travel. I have to time travel, and I have to collect the negative buildings, the anomalies. And actually, I didn't find it as enjoyable as the other paths, because it just wasn't really my style of gameplay. I'd like to sort of build a more balanced tableau. That's always sort of what I try to do. I like to be able to do a little bit of everything. And this sort of was just like, here's what you do. You go hard on yellows, and if you have some spare time to pick up some points elsewhere, then you do it. And it didn't feel as creative or interesting to me as the other routes. So but also, I don't know, after the game, I thought about it more, and I was like, no, if I had done this, it actually would have been a little more interesting. And so there's a lot of stuff to explore. But I think I think the game, for the amount of complexity it has, I don't think it has the timeless, never get bored of it, always want to play again aspect that we would get from something like Gaia Project. But I think it could take as long to play and as long to teach.
Yeah, I'm. What you said when you started off talking about this, when you were saying that this would be the type of game you would design, I was literally thinking the same thing a couple days ago. I was literally thinking, you know what, these guys do such a great job of putting story into their games, right? Making you feel like you are playing something that you feel like you're part of a story, which is not an easy thing to do in Euros. Particularly, and they really, really excel at it, from the production design to the fact that in this one in particular is telling a story. It has acts. There is a end of the second act disaster that happens literally in the game, and it's pretty amazing. My main concern about the game is the variability. I feel like I won the 2 games I played this week, and I felt in both cases when I was looking at it, I feel in both cases that I randomly picked this faction or that faction, and then the buildings were flipped up, right? And in both cases, the initial flip up of buildings were Yahtzee for me. They were just, oh my goodness, there are 3 things, I'm probably only going to be able to build 2 buildings this round, and there are 3 here that all are perfect for me. Perfect. And that really gave me a leg up that never quite abated, right? Because the buildings that you choose become an engine for you, and if you can quickly and easily meet your evacuation conditions and get that out of the way, then you have so much more time, so many more actions. It is not hard in this game to meet your evacuation conditions. It is not hard to get a big evacuation bonus if you have a little bit of a leg up.
Yeah.
If the basis of the setup of the game, right? If the right super project comes out, if the right end game scoring conditions come out, it can be one of these things where the game kind of is helping you along and giving you extra actions that you can use to get a lot of points in these other areas that you normally wouldn't be able to do. Because the game is really good in the sense that you can't do everything. You can't, no matter what. And you have to really pick and choose, where am I going to get my points from? And sometimes what you think is the way you're going to score points, you end up realizing is swimming upstream because of the actions of the other players and because of just the way the game starts to develop over time. So my question is the randomness of the game too much for the strategic design of the game? Is the game throwing too many curves and too many wrenches out to make what should be a real strategic battle between players less strategic because the winner to some extent is the person that gets the more favorable setup? I don't know. It's far too early for me to say that that's the case, but I'm also really happy that there are so many expansions, and looking at some of these expansions and also looking at the balance that was done in this Essential Edition, I thought was great. I thought it was really well thought of, and I think the designers know what they're doing, and I have faith that in the expansions and in all of this, that they're going to find a balance to all that.
So it's funny because Tricarion to me is a perfect base game. I think Tricarion as a single box, single purchase base game is superior to Anachrony just as the base game. And I think when you add in the expansions to Tricarion, it's potentially too much. It's potentially like that base game is almost the perfect level of weight and strategy. And
Dalgard's Academy. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dalgard's Academy is a step too far for me. I keep trying to play it.
It could be,
and it's so much.
It is. I love it, but it is brain burnery to almost a painful level. Whereas to me, I when I play base game Anachrony, I want my brain to burn a little more. I want to, so I'm wondering if maybe it has the opposite sort of issue where the expansion that's coming out, hopefully by the end of the year, called Fractures of Time, it makes it the perfect sort of quote unquote base game for me. It's going to add in a couple of really interesting things like blinking, which is where you can actually move your worker to a different space on the board. But the downside is it then opens up that space again for somebody else. So I think there could be more buildings being bought. There's a new resource that comes in that allows you to do that. It's very expensive. Your breakthroughs can now be used for other things on a whole other board. So I think it's going to add in some potential other strategies and some cool things going on.
It's got a sideboard with Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's got matter of fact, you mentioned Lorenzo. Just like Lorenzo, the expansion of Lorenzo adds a fifth tower. This adds a valley, which is a sideboard that adds a fifth line of action spaces. And there's a whole new faction. There is a whole new faction, the Path of Unity, that plays in a very different way. So,
and a whole new set of leaders for every single faction in the game, thus potentially making it, wildly variable as well, because those leaders really change up the way you play.
Yeah, I guess with all of the caveats that we're giving, it says something about the base design of the game that we are jumping up and down, and we can't wait to get this expansion because at the end of the day, we have played Anachrony and we want more. I think that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and they are one of the must-buy companies for me. I mean, I've played I've played an early version of Castaway Chronicles Perseverance, and it could be their best game. It's really strong, really interesting, and just the fact that it's multiple games that completely have nothing to do with each other in terms of like they don't require each other. They work as their own, but they can also connect to tell a larger story. I mean, they're attempting to do things narratively in board games that no one else is even playing with, and it's really exciting to me.
Yeah, and I'll say this about Anachrony: it is possible. I'm not going to say likely, but it is possible that because of the production values, because of the story that it's telling, because of the asteroid crash in the middle of the game, you might be able to convert some Ameritrash gamers over to this game.
Totally. Especially if you've got those minis.
Yeah, it's a complete Euro game. In no way, shape, or form does it have any design elements that are particularly Ameritrashy, but the coding, the the dress that this game is put on, and to some degree the feel of it, right? That feel of telling a story. That's something that really attracts Amerithrash players and might very well here. So if you got people that won't play Agricola with you because they want to play Blood Bowl, maybe pull this out and say, oh, I was thinking of playing this with you, but no, you probably don't want to play it. Maybe they'll come over.
And the fact that it's a slightly lighter base game compared to Dracarion, like I would never teach Dracarion to a non-Euro gamer just because it's a really beefy teach. But this is a notch less complicated just in the base game, right? I think you could get away with it.
Totally agree. That is Anachrony. There's the new Essential Edition coming out or out right now, and
it's out now. It's mostly available directly through Mindclash. I think it's trickling its way into stores, but you can definitely order it directly from their website. Anywhere in the world, they'll ship it to you, I believe.
And their expansion is supposed to be coming out this year, so looking forward to that as well.
Hopefully by the end of the year.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.